The Human Torch. He debuted in Marvel Comics #1 back in 1939, created by Carl Burgos, and at the time he was one of the most popular heroes on the stands. This wasn't the Johnny Storm fans know today, it was Jim Hammond, an android built by scientist Phineas Horton. The twist? Hammond's artificial body had a flaw that caused him to erupt in flames whenever exposed to oxygen. That flaw made him terrifying at first, but once Horton contained him, the Torch was unleashed as a hero. Through the early 1940s, he was a cornerstone of timely comics, Marvel's Golden Age identity, headlining alongside Namor the Submariner and Captain America. He fought Axis threats, battled mad scientists, and even had his own fiery sidekick named Toro. For a few years, the Torch was a legitimate A-lister. Then the fire started to sputter out. After the end of World War II, readers moved away from superhero comics, chasing romance and horror instead. By 1954, the Human Torch's series was officially canceled. The android hero, who once symbolized Marvel's rise, was suddenly irrelevant. A relic from a different era. But Hammond wasn't gone forever. When Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created the Fantastic Four in 1961, they decided to bring back the name Human Torch for a brand new character. This time, it was Johnny Storm, a hot-headed teenager with a car obsession and an attitude that matched his flame powers. Unlike Hammond, Johnny clicked with a new generation, giving the Human Torch a permanent home in Marvel's modern era. The legacy didn't stop there. In a wild piece of Marvel lore, Hammond's android body was later retconned as the template that Ultron used to create the Vision. So even though Jim Hammond's flame burned out, his ashes sparked not one but two enduring legends in Marvel history. Dr. Droom. In 1961, Marvel tried to introduce its first mystical superhero, and his name was Dr. Droom. He wasn't exactly the most memorable sorcerer to ever hit the page. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Anthony Droom was a successful psychiatrist who traveled to Tibet, where he met an ancient lama who granted him magical powers. The pitch was supposed to be Marvel's bold entry into the world of mysticism, with a hero who could handle supernatural threats. On paper, it sounded like a big idea. In practice, the execution fell flat. Dr. Droom's adventures were shallow monster of the week stories that leaned heavily on hypnosis and simple illusions. Instead of epic battles with dark forces, readers got parlor tricks dressed up as sorcery. And to make things stranger, his origin included a transformation that changed his facial features to look Asian, a decision that quickly felt more awkward than intriguing. By the end of the 1961, the experiment had burned out. Dr. Droom only lasted a handful of issues before Marvel pulled the plug and quietly retitled the book Amazing Adventures into something else. He wasn't just forgotten, he was erased, buried under the wave of new heroes that Marvel was beginning to roll out. But the story doesn't stop there. A couple of years later, artist Steve Ditko pitched a new concept, a sorcerer who fought demons and warlocks in dreamlike, surreal landscapes. Stan Lee borrowed from the framework of Dr. Droom, but this time the character had style, personality, and real mystique. In 1963, Doctor Strange debuted in Strange Tales and became Marvel's definitive master of the mystic arts. So while Dr. Droom fizzled out almost instantly, his DNA carried forward. That short-lived flop cracked open the door for a hero who would one day anchor movies, comics, and an entire branch of Marvel's universe. Ghost Rider. Before Marvel's Ghost Rider was a flaming skull on a motorcycle, the name belonged to a gunslinger in the Old West. The original Ghost Rider galloped into Tim Holt #11 in 1949, created by Ray Crank and Dick Ayers. Carter Slade, the cowboy under the mask, rode a pale horse and wore a bright, almost glowing white outfit. His gimmick was fear. Outlaws believed he was a ghost, and he used that to his advantage while cleaning up dusty frontier towns. At first, the character had momentum. Readers in the late 1940s were still hooked on westerns, and the Ghost Rider stood out with his eerie, supernatural spin. He even graduated into his own solo title. But by 1956, the publisher folded, and with it, the cowboy ghost disappeared. Marvel tried to bring him back in 1967, reviving the character almost exactly as before, a cowboy hero named Ghost Rider who leaned on spook show theatrics to scare criminals. The problem was simple. Western comics were running out of steam. After just 7 issues, Marvel renamed him the Phantom Rider and quietly moved on. That could have been the end of the name entirely. Instead, Marvel reused Ghost Rider for a bold new launch in 1972. This time, the hero was Johnny Blaze, a daredevil stuntman who made a deal with the devil and paid for it with fire and chains. Johnny's transformation into the skull-faced biker Ghost Rider gave Marvel one of its most recognizable supernatural heroes. The cowboy version vanished into obscurity, but the name lived on in a character who went from cult comics to movie screens and pop culture legend. Him, Adam Warlock. In Fantastic Four numbers 66 to 67, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby introduced a group of scientists called the Enclave. Their project was simple: engineer the perfect human life form inside a golden cocoon. What emerged was a glowing figure with unbelievable power. They named him Him. At first glance, it looked like Marvel had its next great hero, but Him wasn't much of a character at all. He rebelled against his creators, clashed with Thor, and then sealed himself back in his cocoon to float away into space. Beyond raw power, he had no purpose, no mission, no identity. Readers didn't latch on, and Marvel shelved him after only a handful of appearances. That could have been the end of the story, just another forgotten Silver Age experiment. But in 1972, writer Roy Thomas and artist Gil Kane decided to bring him back with a complete overhaul. In Marvel Premiere number 1, the cocoon opened again, and the being emerged with a new name: Adam Warlock. The High Evolutionary gave him direction, the Soul Gem gave him cosmic weight, and suddenly Marvel had a hero with real depth. Under Jim Starlin, Adam Warlock became something much bigger than his failed beginnings. He wrestled with questions of destiny, faith, and identity while battling his darker alter ego, the Magus. He stood toe-to-toe with Thanos in stories that shaped the entire cosmic corner of Marvel Comics. The character who once floated aimlessly became a linchpin of sagas like Infinity Gauntlet, and decades later, he'd make the jump into Marvel movies. Black Widow. Long before Natasha Romanoff ever stepped onto the page, Marvel's very first Black Widow was already sending villains straight to hell. Her name was Clairvoyant, and she made her debut in Mystic Comics number 4 back in 1940, created by George Capitan and Harry Saley. Claire wasn't your typical Golden Age superhero. She started out as a psychic medium who fell victim to a violent crime. Murdered by criminals, she was resurrected by Satan himself and transformed into the Black Widow, a supernatural assassin with a terrifying mission: deliver the souls of evildoers to her new master in the underworld. Armed with mystical powers and a chilling death touch, she struck fear into anyone unlucky enough to cross her path. It was a bold concept, but it didn't fit comfortably into the superhero craze of the 1940s. Readers gravitated to colorful, patriotic heroes like Captain America and Wonder Woman, not a hellbound Avenger with horror roots. Claire appeared in only a handful of issues, her mix of occult themes and supernatural punishment pushing her further outside the mainstream. Before long, she faded into the pile of forgotten Golden Age experiments. Her name, however, lived on. When Marvel needed a femme fatale spy in 1964, they dusted off Black Widow and gave it to Natasha Romanoff, a Russian agent turned Avenger. Natasha had no connection to Satan, no mystical curses, just espionage skills, martial arts training, and a complex character arc that made her one of Marvel's most popular heroines. Decades later, she would headline blockbuster films, something Clairvoyant could never have imagined. Vision, Arcus. Before the Avengers ever welcomed their android powerhouse, there was another Vision walking through Marvel's pages, and he came out of a cloud of smoke. Arcus, sometimes spelled Arcus, debuted in Marvel Mystery Comics number 13 in 1940, created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. His origin was strange even by Golden Age standards: an alien lawman from another dimension summoned to Earth by a scientist's experiment. Cloaked in mist and firelight, he could bend cold and fog to his will while hunting criminals. Visually, he was unforgettable. Green skin, red costume, and a tall, high-collared cape made him look more like a ghostly apparition than a traditional superhero. He'd materialize out of swirling smoke to terrify crooks, and for a short while he carried a supernatural mystique that helped him stand out. But Arcus never broke through. While Captain America, Namor, and the Human Torch became timely comics headliners, the alien crime fighter only managed scattered appearances. By 1943, his stories dried up and he vanished into obscurity as the superhero market shifted. For decades, the original Vision was nothing more than a trivia note from the Golden Age. Then came 1968. Writer Roy Thomas wanted to add a new hero to the Avengers and decided to revive the Vision name. This version was no interdimensional ghost. He was an android built by Ultron and brought to life with synthetic flesh. Introduced in Avengers number 57, the new Vision shared only the name and the dramatic smoke-filled entrances of Arcus. What he gained instead was a full emotional arc, joining the Avengers, struggling with his humanity, and eventually marrying Scarlet Witch. The Golden Age Vision never became a star, but his eerie design and memorable name left just enough of a mark for Marvel to reinvent him. Arcus was forgotten, yet he set the stage for one of the Avengers' most enduring icons. Iron Fist, Amazing Man. He debuted in Amazing Man Comics number 5 in 1939. published by Centaur Comics and created by Bill Everett, the same artist who co-created Namor the Submariner. John Amon, the man behind the mask, had a mystical origin. Orphaned as a child, the Council of Seven took him in, a secret order in Tibet that trained him to peak human perfection. Through years of discipline, he gained enhanced strength, speed, and even the ability to transform his body into a misty green vapor. For a short time, Amazing Man stood shoulder to shoulder with the early wave of Golden Age superheroes. His adventures mixed pulp action with exotic mysticism, giving him a unique flavor compared to costumed crime fighters of the era. But his run didn't last. Centaur Comics collapsed in 1942, and with it, Amazing Man disappeared almost overnight. His stories were left unfinished, his character forgotten as the Golden Age closed its doors on dozens of heroes. 3 decades later, Marvel reached back into that same reservoir of ideas. In 1974, writer Roy Thomas and artist Gil Kane unveiled Danny Rand, better known as Iron Fist. Danny's backstory mirrored John Amon's almost beat for beat. An orphan trained in a hidden eastern city, returning to the outside world with extraordinary abilities. Instead of mist powers, Danny channeled his chi into the Iron Fist, a strike that could shatter walls and crush steel. Iron Fist succeeded where Amazing Man couldn't. He became a staple of Marvel's 1970s kung fu craze, teamed up with Luke Cage in Heroes for Hire, and carried on through decades of comics, television adaptations, and crossover stories. Matallo. In April 1961, just before Marvel's superhero boom really took off, Tales of Suspense number 16 introduced a strange one-off villain named Matallo. His story started with a criminal named Mike Fallon who volunteered for an experiment that sealed him inside an indestructible metal suit. The transformation gave him incredible strength and radiation-proof armor, turning him into a walking tank. But there was a cruel twist. Fallon couldn't survive outside the suit anymore. Radiation was the only thing keeping him alive. He was forced to rob banks and prisons just to keep his body supplied with the fuel that prevented his own death. What looked like invincibility quickly became a prison, locking him into a fate worse than anything he imagined. Matallo's story ended as fast as it began. After a short, destructive rampage, the character vanished into Marvel's stack of anthology oddities. He only popped up occasionally in scattered stories, never becoming a real threat or a recurring figure. To most readers, Matallo was just another name in Marvel's pre-hero monster era, a doomed villain who disappeared as quickly as he arrived. Yet the concept lingered. The image of a man bound to armor for survival planted a seed. Just 2 years later, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created Tony Stark, a weapons genius gravely injured in battle who built a suit of armor that doubled as life support. Unlike Matallo, Stark used his new condition to fight for redemption and became Iron Man, a founding Avenger and a global icon decades later. Matallo never broke out of his own metal shell, but his short, forgotten story showed Marvel how to turn a grim survival trap into the blueprint for one of its most enduring heroes, the Shield. Before Captain America ever threw his round shield, another hero was already draped in stars and stripes. That was the Shield, who debuted in Pep Comics number 1 back in January 1940, created by Harry Shorten and Irv Novick. Joe Higgins, a chemist who gained powers through a special formula, became America's first patriotic superhero. He was super strong, nearly invulnerable, and wore a costume that looked like the American flag stitched into armor. During World War II, the Shield was a legitimate hit. He had his own solo title, appeared in Pep Comics, and fought Nazi spies months before the United States even entered the war. For a while, he stood tall as the star of MLJ Publications, the company that would later become Archie Comics. But after the war ended, superhero comics collapsed in popularity. Kids didn't want patriotic crusaders anymore. They wanted romance, horror, and humor. By the early 1950s, MLJ shifted completely toward Archie and his teenage gang, leaving the Shield to vanish quietly into obscurity. Meanwhile, over at Timely Comics, the seeds of another patriotic hero were sprouting. In 1941, Timely rolled out Captain America, who at first carried a triangular shield that looked suspiciously close to the design on the shield's chest. MLJ complained, and to avoid legal trouble, Timely changed Cap's weapon into the now iconic circular shield. That redesign turned into one of the most famous symbols in comic book history. The shield faded from memory while Captain America went on to become a fixture of Marvel's universe, leading the Avengers, starring in blockbuster films, and standing as Marvel's ultimate symbol of justice. The Fly. Before Spider-Man ever swung through New York, there was The Fly. In 1959, Archie Comics wanted its own superhero revival and teamed up with legends Joe Simon and Jack Kirby to create Adventures of the Fly #1. The story followed Tommy Troy, a teenage orphan who stumbled on a magic ring. That ring granted him the powers of the Insect Kingdom, super strength, wall climbing, and agility, and transformed him into a costumed hero in green and yellow. The Fly was supposed to usher in a new era for Archie's adventure line. He even fought villains with insect themes like a giant giant spider in his first outing. But despite the pedigree behind him, the character never took hold. The book only lasted a few years before sales fizzled out. Archie's focus turned back to its teen humor comics, and The Fly joined the long list of forgotten Golden and Silver Age experiments. What makes him legendary was what he set in motion. Simon and Kirby's original pitch for the character was actually called Spider-Man, or Silver Spider. Editors at the time worried kids would find spiders too creepy, so they swapped it to The Fly and toned the concept down. Just 3 years later, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko revisited the idea, but this time, they gave the hero a scientific accident origin, a grounded personality, and the everyday problems of a teenager. That hero was Peter Parker, and he transformed Spider-Man into Marvel's crown jewel. Without that failed experiment, the spark that became Spider-Man might never have been lit. And that's it. Now to you, if all these Marvel's biggest legends were born from failure, which modern misfire do you think could secretly be the foundation of the next great hero? Comment down below, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.